Welcome to the Economist in Your Ear podcast. If a groundbreaking new treatment could save your life, or the life of someone you love, would you pause to ask which country it was invented in?
I mean, realistically, no. For anyone facing a medical crisis, the origin of the molecule is like the absolute last thing on their mind. You just want the cure to work.
Exactly. Today, our conversation centers entirely on a recent article from The Economist titled, "Don't Restrict Chinese Biotech," and the broader geopolitical context surrounding it. We are going to critically unpack the collision between global health and these emerging geopolitical tech wars.
Right, specifically looking at the arguments for and against the U.S. heavily restricting international biotech collaboration with China.
Because there's this huge tension, right, between the promise of medical breakthroughs and the realities of national security concerns.
Yeah, and just to set the stage for you here, the source material touches on some highly charged U.S.-China relations and, well, domestic U.S. politics. But our goal here is not to take a side or endorse a political platform. Instead, we're just going to synthesize the data, examine the economic arguments, and really help you understand that underlying tension between scientific progress and economic protectionism.
Right, and to understand why U.S. policymakers are suddenly treating biotech as a new battleground, we first have to look at a staggering statistical shift in where medical innovation is actually happening.
Oh, the shift is massive.
It really is. The raw statistics paint a very different picture compared to just a few years ago. I mean, a decade ago, Chinese firms ran just 6% of the world's clinical trials.
6%, just a blip, really.
Barely anything. But last year, they ran nearly a third of all global clinical trials. China is now the world's second largest source of new drugs, trailing only the U.S.
And the financial validation by the global market is equally stark. Like, in 2025, nearly half of all pharmaceutical licensing deals worth $50 million or more were struck with Chinese firms.
Half.
Yeah, half. And going back to 2020, that number was 0.
Wow. Okay, let's unpack this, because a leap like that defies normal economic growth models. Think about the automotive industry. Imagine a country goes from manufacturing just 6% of the world's cars, and mostly basic models at that, to suddenly inventing and patenting the engines for 1/3 of all vehicles on the road in just 10 years.
That's almost unbelievable.
Right. And they aren't just building standard engines. They are patenting the most advanced electric or hydrogen tech out there.
Yeah.
You don't organically build a massive, highly regulated pharmaceutical industry overnight, so there has to be a deliberate structural mechanism driving this.
Yeah, there's a multi-layered mechanism at work here. First, you have these massive state-backed subsidies. The Chinese government basically identified biotechnology as a strategic pillar and just poured capital into building massive biotech parks.
Like ready-made ecosystems for research.
Exactly. And second, and perhaps more importantly, there's been this massive reverse brain drain. I mean, for decades, China's brightest scientific minds came to U.S. universities. They trained at top-tier American institutions and worked in American hubs like Boston or San Francisco.
Absorbing the playbook.
Right, learning the absolute cutting edge. Over the last decade, lucrative incentives have lured thousands of those highly trained scientists. They're often called sea turtles, returning home back to China to launch their own startups.
So they essentially took the American playbook for pharmaceutical innovation and replicated the infrastructure in their own backyard, backed by unlimited state capital.
And it is yielding highly sophisticated biology. I mean, the article highlights that in the cutting-edge space of antibody-drug conjugates, Chinese firms accounted for almost all of the recent global licensing.
Which is a huge deal.
Huge. Antibody-drug conjugates, or ADCs, they represent a fundamental shift in scientific capability. It's a move away from just acting as the world's factory for generic pills.
Right, because traditional chemotherapy is essentially, carpet bombing the body. It kills cancer cells, but it also kills healthy cells, which is why the side effects are so devastating.
Exactly.
But ADCs, they operate more like a molecular Trojan horse. They disguise a highly toxic chemotherapy drug inside a targeted antibody, and that antibody specifically circulates through the bloodstream, looking for a unique protein found only on the surface of a cancer cell.
It's incredibly precise. It ignores healthy tissue, knocks on the door of the cancer cell, gets let inside, and only then does it release the poison.
Which is just brilliant.
It really is. But building that Trojan horse requires mastering complex protein engineering, synthetic chemistry, and immunology all simultaneously. So having almost all the global licensing in this specific, highly promising category originate from Chinese firms.
It proves the actual discovery pipeline has become thoroughly internationalized.
Exactly. even though Chinese biotech executives still privately acknowledge the U.S. FDA as the global regulatory leader.
Right, the ultimate goal is still to get a drug approved in the American market.
Yeah.
But the early-stage chemical compounds and the initial clinical data, well, they're increasingly crossing the Pacific.
And this rapid rise in foreign innovation naturally triggers a ton of anxiety in Washington. Policymakers look at the reliance on foreign innovation and, they're instinctively reaching for the emergency brake.
Applying the exact same restrictive blueprints to biotech that they've used for semiconductors and AI.
Yeah, the article outlines a few of these specific moves, like the proposed amendment to the Coins Act, which, if you think about it, is essentially a financial geofence.
A financial geofence?
Yeah, it threatens to actively restrict American venture capital from being invested in licensing Chinese biotech.
Mm-hmm.
It attempts to wall off the flow of dollars toward foreign medical research. And even more aggressively, some are pushing for the FDA to completely disregard clinical trial data coming from China.
Wait, I need to push back on the article's framing here. Because The Economist explicitly says that to view Chinese medical innovation as anything other than good news would be a mistake.
Right.
But the article also casually notes that China currently controls over 70% of the active pharmaceutical ingredients for essential drugs.
They do.
So isn't it completely rational for U.S. policymakers to be worried about supply chain dependency, especially when health is on the line? If one single country controls the raw ingredients required to manufacture basic medicines, treating that entirely as good news seems to gloss over a massive strategic vulnerability.
What's fascinating here is that you're hitting on the exact conflation of issues that is muddying the current policy debate. It's vital to clearly separate manufacturing resilience from scientific collaboration.
Okay, separate them how?
Well, active pharmaceutical ingredients, or APIs, are the physical chemical building blocks of drugs. That 70% figure represents a genuine, immediate vulnerability. If a geopolitical crisis disrupts physical shipping lanes, relying on one single source for physical manufacturing is a massive liability.
Right, if the cargo ships stop sailing, the pharmacy shelves empty out.
Exactly. But the sharing of clinical trial data and the licensing of new molecules, that operates on a fundamentally different logic. In AI, the fear is U.S. intellectual property leaking outward, right?
Yeah, giving away the keys to the castle.
But in biotech, the dynamic is inverted. The U.S. is actively importing valuable, life-saving data from China. The U.S. is gathering the intelligence.
Okay, I see. So if a foreign lab discovers a brilliant new molecule to fight leukemia, and an American firm licenses that molecule to run late-stage trials, American patients get the treatment, and American companies collect the eventual profit.
Exactly. Restricting that inward flow of information doesn't protect American IP. It starves American science of raw material. And look at the sheer economic reality of the alternative.
The costs.
The costs are astronomical. Bringing a single new medicine to market right now costs roughly $2.8 billion.
$2.8 billion.
Yeah.
That is the GDP of a small island nation, just to get one single pill from a laboratory onto a pharmacy shelf. And the timeline is well over a decade.
So if the U.S. government forces the FDA to categorically ignore perfectly good Chinese clinical data simply because of its geographic origin, U.S. pharmaceutical companies would have to completely start over.
Oh, wow.
They'd have to design new early-stage trials, recruit American patients, and rerun a multi-year biological process from scratch. It's jacking up costs and lengthening timelines.
Imagine being an oncologist sitting in a clinic with a patient. You know a highly effective cure exists. You know it has been safely tested abroad. But you have to tell that patient they cannot have it for another 5 years because of a geopolitical data embargo.
It's a tragic scenario. And it potentially guarantees that pioneer treatments reach Europe or Asia years before Americans get them.
Okay, so if ignoring data is economically counterproductive, what about the financial argument? The political fear that licensing Chinese molecules diverts research budgets away from U.S. biotech.
Ah, yes. The fear that buying foreign tech starves domestic companies of capital.
Right, because that brings us to the core of the financial and domestic challenges facing U.S. biotech. Like, every dollar sent to Shanghai is a dollar taken from Boston.
The article identifies this as the lump of capital fallacy.
Right.
It assumes there's a fixed, static pie of investment money. But investment isn't a fixed pie. As we've seen in the AI boom, capital floods in when opportunities grow.
A rising tide expands the total pool.
Exactly. And American firms still absolutely dominate late-stage clinical trials, regulatory review, and commercial launch.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. because there's a huge irony here. The article argues the U.S. is pointing the finger outward at China, right?
Yep.
But Washington is fiercely neglecting its own backyard.
Yep.
The recent internal U.S. struggles are wild.
The domestic hurdles are significantly more threatening to long-term American leadership, yes.
Like the high turnover at the FDA, the resignation of its head, Marty McCurry, and these new FDA priority vouchers that speed up reviews. I mean, are these vouchers actually a clever way to force domestic resilience? Or do they just create more bureaucratic hurdles for drug makers?
Well, getting a drug reviewed faster is great, but these vouchers require firms to lower prices and heavily invest in domestic manufacturing.
So it's a massive disincentive.
Huge. And on top of that, you have reduced funding for the National Institutes of Health. Entire research programs have ended. Squeezing the NIH starves the early-stage pipeline.
And then you have the immigration policies.
Right. By creating restrictive immigration environments, the U.S. makes itself less attractive to top-tier global scientists, including Chinese researchers.
We're basically telling the brightest minds to take their research elsewhere.
Exactly. The real threat to American leadership isn't Chinese clinical trials. It's a lack of NIH funding and restrictive immigration policies that turn away the very talent needed to maintain dominance.
Which brings us to the synthesis. What does this all mean for you listening? It means that when you go to the pharmacy a decade from now, the speed, cost, and availability of your medicine will be directly impacted by whether these two massive economies decide to share their homework or tear it up.
And it leaves us with this critical question not directly answered in the text. If a future global health crisis emerges, can a bifurcated nationalistic medical system possibly respond fast enough? Or does the very nature of disease demand that we treat medical research as a borderless human right rather than a geopolitical asset?
Thanks for listening. Follow us for daily insights into world affairs. And don't forget to like, comment, and share.